Okay, so today we're going to talk about the topic of photosynthesis, and at the end of this discussion you should be able to describe the two steps of photosynthesis. And just like we saw with cellular respiration, we don't really have an essential question at the end of this, but rather an essential task. Your essential task is to be able to describe these two steps in photosynthesis in regards to their inputs and outputs. Remember that the ultimate goal of photosynthesis is to create sugars that are the direct or indirect energy source for all living things. But before we really get into the process of photosynthesis, I want to ask you a question. When a seed grows into a tree, where does all the mass come from? Does it come from the soil, the water, the sunlight, the air? What do you think? What we're going to do first is we're actually going to watch this video and see if we can figure out the answer to that question.
Trees are some of the biggest organisms on the planet. But where do they get that matter to grow?
It's nutrients out of the ground.
It's that soil, really, yeah.
Goodness out of the soil, I suppose.
Comes out of the soil.
Yeah,
Goodness.
goodness.
Why isn't there a big hole around the tree where it's taken out all the soil?
Because it doesn't say gradually, but the soil has time to recover.
Now, I think it's intuitive to believe that the tree gets most of its mass from the soil, because you can see those roots digging into the soil, and they must be taking something out of there. And I mean, a tree looks like dirt, and it feels solid like dirt, but it's not. In the early 1600s, a scientist named Johann Baptist van Helmont tried to figure out where the mass of a tree was coming from. So he got a pot of soil and very carefully measured the amount of soil in there. Then he planted the tree and took care of it for 5 years, making sure that no soil left or was added to his pot. And at the end of this experiment, he weighed the tree to find that it was 72 kilograms, but the mass of soil had only decreased by about 60 grams. This was pretty strong evidence that the mass of the tree does not come from the soil.
I've never thought about that, actually, because they don't really eat anything, trees.
They don't eat anything?
No.
They don't eat anything.
Water is all they absorb.
That's all they eat.
Yeah.
They don't eat anything else.
No.
That's all they eat.
Well, presumably from the water and the nutrients from the soil.
Is there anything else that you need besides the soil and the water
I suppose that's all you need, isn't it?
to make wood?
Other than the original seed for that particular tree, I
The seed and the soil and the water, and that makes this big tree.
suppose.
Of course, Johann Baptist van Helmont did conclude that the tree was made entirely of water. Now, while that's not correct, at least he was on the right track, realizing that the matter of a tree doesn't come out of the soil.
The sun, energy, yeah.
The sun energy.
Yeah.
Are they converting energy into mass, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't
Like
know.
there wasn't stuff, and then there was. Like, where did that stuff come from?
Magic. I have no idea.
My question is, where do they get that mass to grow big?
Sun. Get it from the rain, and the sun, presumably. Light. Sunlight.
And the sunshine.
The sunshine? Does the sunshine add mass to the tree?
Well, they wouldn't grow without it. I don't know whether it adds mass, but they wouldn't grow without it.
Of course, the sun's energy is needed for the tree to build the matter into its branches and leaves. But the sun itself, the energy, is not matter.
Well, I suppose we've got to put air into this as well. If you there's got to be something out of the,
What is it about the air?
a gas in the air that it needs as well.
Oxygen.
The trees need the oxygen.
Yeah, they need the oxygen, don't they?
And, I guess, oxygen.
The oxygen, of course.
The oxygen? Are there any ingredients that we're missing?
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide.
So would it surprise you to find out that 95% of a tree is actually from carbon dioxide? Trees are
much,
largely
yeah.
made up of air.
Yeah.
I need this reaction like, holy So as it turns out, trees are mostly made out of air, out of the carbon dioxide that they take in. What's interesting is that we breathe out carbon dioxide and water. That's how we lose mass. But it's the exact same substances that trees breathe in to gain mass. So if you can imagine a closed system where it was just you and a tree, you would breathe out that carbon dioxide and water, the tree would take it in, so you would get smaller while the tree is getting bigger. And in a sense, you're becoming the tree.
So, most people do in fact guess that it's the soil and the water, but they're wrong. So, really, carbon is what is making this tree go from a tiny seed to a massive organism. And in that, it's actually the air that you breathe out, a gas that's invisible, that has a mass you can't really sense, that makes the tree grow into this massive living organism. And this, of course, all because of photosynthesis. And that brings us to our first main topic for today. What is photosynthesis? Well, photosynthesis is the process of using the energy of sunlight to convert water and carbon dioxide into high-energy sugars and oxygen. And what I want you to see is that you've got the equation for photosynthesis here that you're putting in your notes, and it looks very similar to the equation for cellular respiration. It's just basically flipped. And so remembering that this needs to be balanced, of course, we put in our 6's as our coefficients to make sure that everything lines up pre- and post-reaction in regards to the numbers of atoms. But really, what I want you to see here is that plants take in the gas carbon dioxide from the air, water from the soil, and then with those two products, along with the sun's energy, they're able to create glucose and the waste product of oxygen. So where does this magical process of photosynthesis occur? Well, photosynthesis occurs in chloroplasts. And chloroplasts contain a green pigment called chlorophyll, which absorbs the sun's energy. The chloroplasts appear green because they absorb light and waves of light in all colors except green. Green is reflected, and therefore our eyes perceive the leaves and the plants as being green in color. Chlorophyll is the dominant pigment in most plants, and it performs a majority of the light capture for photosynthesis. However, there are other pigments that absorb other wavelengths of light. When fall comes and leaves start to turn colors, it's actually a response to less direct sunlight. And in that response to a lack of direct sunlight, we get to a peek, a look at the other pigments that the plants use for photosynthesis. The less amount of direct sunlight that a plant receives, the more its chlorophyll begins to break down into its component parts. And as that happens, the other pigments that are in the plant begin to show. And that's how we get those beautiful fall colors. Next, you need to put into your notes the structure of a chloroplast, and you need to know all of these parts and be able to label them for yourselves. So the first thing that I want you to notice is that, again, the chloroplasts, just like the mitochondria, are actually a double-membraned organelle. So again, this is going to allow for us to see multiple reactions going on at the same time without interfering with each other as a means of increased efficiency. Of course, we can start then with the outer and inner membranes, and between those membranes we have the intermembrane space. Moving from the inner membrane space into the intermembrane compartment, we see structures that actually make up the chloroplast. The first thing we see are these flattened discs that are referred to as thylakoids. And within the thylakoid is a structure called the lumen, where the chlorophyll actually resides. Those thylakoids are stacked up. And a stack of thylakoids is referred to as a granum. And a granum is singular, because if I have multiple of them, it's called a grana. So just like a mitochondrion and mitochondria, the plural is grana, the singular is granum, but they're all just stacks of thylakoids. And then within those stacks of thylakoids, the grana are connected with these little pathways called lamella. And the lamella allow the grana to work together in order for photosynthesis to occur. Surrounding these structures is a jelly-like substance that's referred to as the stroma. So we need to take a step back before we go any further into the process of photosynthesis, and we need to review what chemical energy components of a cell. So first of all, cells need to have ATP, adenosine triphosphate, in order to function and perform all their daily tasks. And when ATP gets used, it turns into ADP, adenosine diphosphate, because the third phosphate has been removed. When we remove that third phosphate, a lot of energy is released, and that's how cells use energy from ATP to fuel their processes. Now, ADP can go back into ATP like it's a rechargeable battery. All we have to do is add the phosphate back to the end. In photosynthesis, though, we also need to learn about electron carriers because they had the extra energy that the plant cells need in order to perform photosynthesis. And so specifically, the electron carrier that you need to know is NADP+. When NADP+ is in contact with high energy electrons, it will pick up that ion and it becomes NADPH. So the uncharged form is NADP+, and the charged form is NADPH. Those electron carriers are going to become very important because they add the additional energy that the cell needs in order to perform photosynthesis. So essentially, when we're talking about photosynthesis, we're talking about two types of reactions that must occur in order for glucose to be created from the sun's energy. The first stage is the light-dependent reactions, and the second stage is the light-independent reactions. The light-independent reactions have multiple names, just like the Krebs cycle was the citric acid cycle in cellular respiration. In photosynthesis, the light-independent reactions can be referred to as the dark reactions or the Calvin cycle. The light-dependent reactions are going to occur in the membranes of the thylakoids, okay? And the light-independent reactions occur in the stroma, that jelly-like substance surrounding the structures in the inner membrane. And so that jelly-like substance that surrounds the grana is where the light-independent reactions occur. And the light-dependent reactions actually occur in the membranes of the thylakoids. So right now, in that diagram of your chloroplast that you drew, please go in and add where each of the two reactions occur. The steps of the light-dependent reactions are fairly straightforward. First of all, sunlight comes in and is absorbed by the chlorophyll. It excites the electrons in the chlorophyll, and those electrons get carried away by the NADP+ as it is converted into NADPH. But in order for the H to be available for the NADP to bind to, water must be split into oxygen and hydrogen. So besides producing the hydrogen ion, it also produces the oxygen gas. This oxygen is off-gassed as a waste product. And during this time, ADP is also being converted into ATP. Once the light reactions finish, the light-independent reactions will occur. And remember, these can also be referred to as the dark reactions or the Calvin cycle. These reactions do not require light, but still can occur during the daytime as well. They just don't require the presence of sunlight to occur, which is different than the first set of reactions, the light-dependent reactions. This part of photosynthesis is going to use the products from the light-dependent reactions, the ATP and the NADPH, along with the carbon dioxide to actually create the glucose. If we look here at the drawing of what's actually happening, you can see it's a series of highly complex chemical reactions. This slide is for your information only. I do not expect you to remember this detailed version, but what do you need to remember? Well, you need to remember that there are two reactions in the process of photosynthesis. The first reaction is the light-dependent reactions, and we need light, water, ADP, and NADP+ to go into that set of reactions. So that when we get to the end of these reactions, we have released oxygen as a waste product, and we have created ATP and NADPH, both charged particles, to go into the light-independent or dark reactions. And so, along with carbon dioxide and those two energy molecules, ATP and NADPH, we get glucose, ADP, and NADP+ produced. The ADP and NADP+ go into the light-dependent reactions and the cycle continues on. Photosynthesis is dependent on enzymes. And we learned that enzymes are affected by things like temperature, concentration, and acidity. Therefore, photosynthesis can be affected by those things as well. For instance, if there's a shortage of water, photosynthesis will slow or even stop. because we have to have water in order to be split to produce the hydrogen ions for the NADPH to be formed. Temperature is also a factor in photosynthesis because photosynthesis depends on those enzymes. We know that enzymes are temperature sensitive or they denature. The enzymes of photosynthesis function best between 0 and 35 degrees Celsius, basically from freezing to room temperature. So anything outside of that range is going to slow or stop photosynthesis. The intensity of light can also change or affect the rate of photosynthesis. Increasing light, as a general rule of thumb, will generally increase the rate of photosynthesis. Now we're going to watch a video where we're going to look at photosynthesis in a simulated environment so that you can really see what actually provides us with food to eat and oxygen to breathe in this amazing process called photosynthesis.
Plants provide us with food to eat and oxygen to breathe. They perform this amazing feat by the process of photosynthesis. Let's take a closer look. Photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide, which diffuses into the leaf through small pores and then enters the cells. Inside the cell, carbon dioxide diffuses into the chloroplasts, where photosynthesis takes place. Chloroplasts use energy from light to transform carbon dioxide and water into sugar and oxygen. Zooming into a chloroplast, we see these flattened membranous sacs called thylakoids. Here, light energy is converted to chemical energy in the first phase of photosynthesis, the light reactions. The two green structures you see here are photosystems, large complexes of proteins and chlorophyll that capture light energy. An electron transport chain connects the two photosystems. Notice the small mobile electron carriers that shuttle electrons from one large complex to another. Now let's take a closer look at the steps of the light reactions. The photosystem on the left absorbs light energy, exciting electrons that enter the electron transport chain. Electrons are replaced with electrons stripped from water, creating oxygen as a byproduct. The energized electrons flow down the electron transport chain, releasing energy that is used to pump hydrogen ions, the blue balls, into the thylakoid. In the photosystem on the right, light energy excites electrons, and this time the electrons are captured by an electron carrier molecule, NADPH. The high concentration of hydrogen ions inside the thylakoid powers ATP synthase, producing ATPs. The light reactions in the thylakoid have produced two energy products, ATP and NADPH, that will now power the production of sugar in the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle takes place outside the thylakoids in the stroma, the thick fluid of the chloroplast. At the beginning of the cycle, carbon dioxide molecules combine with molecules called RUBP. The resulting molecules go through a series of reactions powered by ATP and NADPH from the light reactions. Sugar molecules known as G3Ps are produced. Most of the G3Ps are rearranged back into RUBPs that will begin the Calvin cycle again. But the important product of photosynthesis is the remaining G3P sugar. Some G3Ps are used to build glucose, which can combine into starch or cellulose. Still other G3Ps form sucrose. And some of the sugar is broken down by cellular respiration using oxygen in the plant's own mitochondria, generating ATPs that can power other work of the plant. Excess oxygen diffuses out of the leaf through the pores, while more carbon dioxide enters. With three simple ingredients, carbon dioxide, water, and light, plants produce sugar and oxygen by photosynthesis, powering plant metabolism and ultimately providing your fuel as well.
Okay, go ahead and summarize your notes from today by answering your essential task. Now let's take a minute to assess our learning. If carbon dioxide is removed from a plant's environment, what would happen to its production of glucose? No glucose would be produced, more glucose would be produced, the same amount of glucose would be produced. Carbon dioxide does not have an effect on the production of glucose. You should have selected A. Plants gather the sun's energy with light-absorbing molecules called A, glucose, B, thylakoids, C, pigments, or D, chloroplasts. You should have selected C, chlorophyll. Photosynthesis uses sunlight to convert water and carbon dioxide into A, oxygen and glucose, B, ATP and oxygen, C, glucose only, or D, oxygen only. You should have selected A, oxygen and glucose. What is the purpose of ATP? A, ATP creates energy out of sunlight. B, ATP provides energy for cell processes. C, ATP makes food for consumers. Or D, ATP forms ADP, a necessary nutrient. You should have selected B. Which of the following affects the rate of photosynthesis? A, water, B, temperature, C, light intensity, or D, all of the above? You should have selected D, all of the above. Thank you for your work on this, and please be sure to complete your essential task. When you are all done, work on the simulation linked here to go out to Bioman. Thank you.